So the tool is useful in tuning the configuration. So I covered like I mentioned PT upgrade and PT Percona and playback, but there are also two more great tools from Percona toolkit suite, which can help you to collect useful data about your system and kind of assess what kind of changes are required in your MySQL infrastructure. So first of them is the pt-summary, which collects the data about hardware, collects the data about operating system settings, CPU, memory, disk load on the system. It checks the hardware, whether there's a virtualization or not, there's a write card or not, so on and so forth. So there are a couple of, I have a couple of examples in the next slide. pt-mysql-summary, on the other hand, connects to the MySQL instance and then gives you the data about workload and configuration. So what type of queries you're running, I'm talking about the handlers, the COM counters, what kind of hard configuration you're running, because that's pretty important. Like, your runtime configuration might be different than what you see in MyCNF. It also collects a snapshot of current traffic, so you can see how it works more or less, and many other features that are available for you in this particular tool. So the PT summary, these are the examples of samples of the output of this tool. So as you can see, on the left-hand side, we have information about the system, whether there is hard virtualization or not. It's a EC2 instance, so we have a Xen virtualization. There's no SA Linux. We have information about the CPUs, memory, how it's used. We have information about the dirty policy, and then on the right-hand side, schedulers, disk partitioning, some information about the LVM, whether there's an LVM or not. Of course, LVM also, this is important information because it affects your I/O. If there's no write controller here, but if there is any, then you might see some more information about the write settings printed by this tool, some information about the network interfaces, so on and so forth. And also, there's some kind of snapshot of the load in the system collected using vmstat. So this is just gives you some idea about the most important things that you might want to tune, like schedulers, like memory utilization, and this dirty policy, and also some information about the hardware itself, and which is also very important for further MySQL tuning. pt-mysql-summary output. So you can see you have information on the left. You can see the information about the status counters collected based on the current traffic. And there are a lot more. Basically every status counter out there will be printed here. So you have COM, you have handlers, you have temporal tables, so on and so forth. On the right-hand side, you can see a sample of the information about InnoDB's configuration, and this is taken from the runtime. So you want to double check that this is really how you have set in MyCNF, because it's really easy to make some tweaks dynamically in runtime, and then forget to apply them to MyCNF, and this can make things so much, problematic later on. And again, noteworthy variables. So we have information about auto increment. We have information about SQL mode, all those per session and per join buffers. As you can see, they are really small by default. None of them exceeds 256 kilobytes of memory. So this is basically pretty useful summary of the state of your system, or state of your configuration, and then from there you can proceed and apply some tuning. So we're coming to the end of this webinar, and there's still two more questions I would like to answer. So one of them is what to avoid when tuning MySQL. So the problem is that this is not a simple task. I mean, it is time-consuming task, and because you have to go through this process of changing, build the environment, change one variable, test, create the environment, change another variable, test, so on and so forth. It takes time, and people like to cut corners to simplify things and look for different shortcuts. Therefore, the people created tools like MySQL Tuner. There are wizards, configurators, and wizards that have been created. Like for example, Percona had a publicly available configuration wizard, and I believe it's now also available as part of their the Percona Cloud solutions. So also the monitoring tools and monitoring and management tools, they introduced advisors like we do in a cluster control. That just tells you, like, okay, this is something which you may want to take a look at. You may want to increase this variable or that variable. And all of this is very great, but the problem here is that some of those tools, most of those tools based on MySQL status counters. And this can be really tricky because, for example, that's an example from MySQL Tuner. So the fact that you have joins performed without indexes, doesn't just justify increasing join buffer size. And basically, what MySQL Tuner does, for example, in this particular case, is that if you have more than 250, if I remember correctly, joins without indexes per hour, it will tell you to increase join buffer size and set it larger than what you have currently. And it doesn't make any sense, right? Because you may have joins without indexes for some reason. Well, it happens. And then it will be following this recommendations, you'll be just increasing join buffer size or so on and on. It just doesn't make any sense. So, all those settings which based on some kind of ratios, it's not always the really good suggestion. So basically, the thing is that sometimes even a good suggestion, good change, can be a bad decision. So let's say that you run MySQL without binary log enabled, maybe without double buffer, and without support for XA transactions. And some tool may, for example, you for example enable the binary logs because that's what you want. You start running some slaves, and then the tool suggested to enable buffer pool and double buffer and the support for XA transactions. The binary log is great for point-in-time recovery, and for replication is obviously required. So that's okay. Double buffer basically keeps your data safe because it takes care of any potential incomplete writes, any data, any issues with writing the data to InnoDB table spaces and to read the logs also. So this is basically a very important setting, and it should be enabled all the time. Otherwise, you can run some data inconsistency and basically data corruption even. On the other hand, XA support is virtually required when you run binary logs, because otherwise you may end up with different transaction order in InnoDB and in binary log, which can completely, it's just bad. Obviously, you may end up with slave or having a different data set than the master, because it executed queries in a different order. So the suggestion to enable all of this feature is really great, but enabling them will add serious I/O load on the system. That buffer would basically increase your writes almost twofold. XA support for XA transactions will also enable, will make more writes to your system. So your system basically may not survive it. So even though it is a good decision, you still have to think whether it makes sense in your particular case. Maybe you should approach it in some different way. And the last question I'd like to answer is what to keep in mind when tuning MySQL. So first of all, you really want to make sure that you follow the tuning process as we described. So one change at a time at most. Otherwise, you may easily get lost. So if you decide to use some external tools and that provide some suggestions, take them with a grain of salt. So first of all, answer how competent the vendor is in databases. Right? Does the vendor, the producer of the tool, actually understand the databases, works with them? And even if the vendor has the competence, even you know that this vendor knows what he's doing, answer the question, do I really understand what this change is all about and how it will impact my system? So this is very, very important that you understand what you are changing. So if you are setting a new environment, new host, you do some kind of initial tuning. Then you may want to, change this. You use those tools more freely, because especially something like configuration wizards or something like that. It is because it will be initial tuning, right? You do not have a traffic. You don't have an application with some specific patterns. So you won't break it. You just make some changes, and then you will basically change them later on when you benchmark, when your traffic will require it. But if you're running a production, make sure that you really think twice before you make any change. So obviously, the bottom line is you have to use common sense when thinking about implementing any change in the configuration, and make sure that each of your changes has a reason and that you understand its impact.